that's kind of the dramatis personae of this talk. Can we recognise who these people are? This one here.
Galileo.
That's Galileo.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think this might be relevant to a talk on Noam Chomsky?
The mechanisation of the conceptual world. Everything is reduced to mathematics.
Okay, that's certainly important. Yeah. And I mean, Noam Chomsky is often called the Galileo of our time. He's the greatest scientific revolution. So perhaps I should start with this in saying that whether you like Chomsky or not, he's a massive figure, and frequently compared with Einstein, Copernicus. When he wrote his first book, Syntactic Structures, the reviewers said that even if only a part of that book hits the mark, we've got a Copernican revolution on our hands. Noam Chomsky is just this massive figure who's regarded as responsible for possibly the most important scientific development in the middle of the 20th century, which is the so-called cognitive revolution in linguistics, in psychology, in the life sciences, in cognitive science, in a way founding the whole field known as cognitive science. This one here.
René Descartes.
Okay, so again, what's the connection? What might be the
connection? Well, that's a much closer connection
to
Chomsky, because it was Descartes who first put forward the conception of innate ideas, that we're born with certain ideas pre-lodged in our brains.
That's right, and he also, on that basis, speculated that we might be able to work out a perfect, logical, universal language based on those clear, crisp, concise ideas that there's no confusion about. Another sort of kind of biographical connection with Chomsky, I mean, it's just that Chomsky is explicitly described himself as a Cartesian, and he wrote a book called Cartesian Linguistics in 1966.
His theoretical.
Well, the way he puts himself in a historical tradition. So Chomsky invokes two figures primarily, really, historically, and neither of them have anything to do with the 20th century. So Plato, he keeps invoking, and Descartes.
You know what the Irish writer Miles McGottolin said about Descartes? He said Descartes spent a whole winter in Sweden, huddled up against the stove, under the illusion that he was thinking.
Apparently his "I think therefore I am" was sort of eureka moment, was because I think it was carbon monoxide, wasn't it? With a stove burning, or he had extraordinary dreams. Here, pretty obvious. I'm sorry, not a difficult one. Again, Chomsky is often compared to Einstein. And I mean, the lovely thing about Einstein for the populist mind is just this, it got it in one, just a simple formula, E equals mc squared. That's kind of the whole, mass, energy, time, space, everything all in one. And Chomsky's aim is to do that to language, is to have a simple mathematical logic which will explain, in a way, the whole of history and culture, because if you can explain language, according to Chomsky, that's it. From language comes everything else. So history starts with language. Language itself is kind of mathematical. And there's this wonderful idea that you can reduce everything. Never mind about all the complexities. They can all be reduced if you've got the right approach to a very simple, beautiful, perfect, logical formula. Of course, Einstein did it, and it worked. Whether it worked in the same way for the thing about language is, of course, a completely different question. Rather different figure. This probably nobody will know this one unless you've done my lecture, heard me lecture on this before.
This is
the
one we don't know. It must be
Klebnikov. And the reason I put him in there is because people often don't realise that when Chomsky keeps invoking these classical figures, Plato, Descartes, and others, and he never invokes anything in the 20th century. And yet my view is that if there was a cognitive revolution, a scientific revolution, in a really important sense, it was the Russian Revolution. Of course, the Russian Revolution wasn't just in Russia, it was part of a European upheaval, and the ideals of the Russian Revolution were internationalist, of course. But out of that revolution, I don't necessarily mean just out of the politics, out of the ferment before and during and after, came a wealth of brilliant ideas, and those had a direct impact on what is then called the cognitive revolution in the United States several decades later. And Klebnikov was a key figure in that. So, I mean, Klebnikov was kind of mystic in some ways, a poet, by no means a scientist, although he thought he was. He thought he was a mathematician and a linguist. But his ideas were so sort of futuristic, and he was a futurist, of course, and so original and so rich, and he what he did is that it happens quite often is that before science gets around to making a discovery, artists, writers, musicians maybe have kind of intimations of these ideas, and it takes somebody else to put them down and make them work scientifically. But a lot of the ideas which we associate with the cognitive revolution came out of Russian futurism, particularly out of Klebnikov actually. And what happened was, who's this person here? Does anyone know?
Roman Jakobson.
That's Roman Jakobson. So Roman Jakobson was an associate of Klebnikov. He was just a schoolboy at the time, in the time period of the Russian Revolution, but he was chasing after Klebnikov and his other heroes, and Mayakovsky as well, and Malevich, Kandinsky. There's no end to them, genius artists and theatre directors and poets and so on in that period. And it was Jakobson who kind of codified Klebnikov's ideas. So Klebnikov had the idea that languages, he didn't use the word digital, but he had the idea that language, it isn't just arbitrary. It's rather like if you take, say, chemistry, and you've got all the different elements and compounds. Mendeleev, scientists, worked out the periodic table of elements. So beneath the difference between iron and uranium and carbon and so on, you can work out the atomic weights, and you can put them in a table. And Klebnikov thought you could do the same thing with language. You could reduce the sounds of language and the way in which they alter meanings to an organised form. And Jakobson took that up, and the reason why that's important is it gives me a connection between the Russian Revolution and Chomsky, because many of the best ideas actually of Chomsky were directly taken from Roman Jakobson. So Klebnikov, from the Russian Revolution, massively influenced Jakobson, and then 30 years later Jakobson becomes the world's most authoritative, famous linguist in many ways, regarded as, the part of linguistics was regarded as solidly scientific, was phonology. Having set up the Prague School of Linguistics, or helped set it up, by the time Jakobson, having escaped from the Nazis just before the war, found a lot of luck really, found his way to New York and eventually to Harvard. Jakobson was regarded as the most scientific linguist of all the branches of linguistics. Jakobson argued that there's something logical and natural about language. It isn't just arbitrary forms, there's some deep logical structure to it. And I'll go into that maybe later. And it was that which most inspired Chomsky to develop his theory. One of the things which most inspired Chomsky, many people would say the main thing actually, the most important thing behind Chomsky was this work of Jakobson. And it's called distinctive features theory. We'll get to that in a minute. So who else? Now this is, of course, anyone know that?
Levi-Strauss?
That's Levi-Strauss. And the thing here is that Jakobson had two kind of intellectual offspring, if you like. Jakobson profoundly influenced Jakobson and Noam Chomsky, profoundly. And so Levi-Strauss has written that his method of structural analysis, the way he looks at kinship systems and rituals, and especially myths, is an application of Jakobson's theory of distinctive features to these other areas. And Levi-Strauss is quite modest in that sense. He says, I'm not doing anything new, I'm just applying Jakobson's theory to, for example, mythology. And we'll get to what Jakobson's theory is and why it seemed to work. But equally, another, if almost pupil, well, in a way, pupil of Jakobson was Noam Chomsky. Okay, we've got a really big figure here.
Alan Turing?
Alan Turing. I haven't seen the film yet. I'm quite keen on seeing it. But so, all right. Why is that relevant?
Well, he believed that computers could simulate natural language to such an extent that he made it the test for machine intelligence, whether a computer could answer a question in such a way that the asker would not know whether a human or a machine had done the work.
Yeah. So he's regarded as the
Chinese test or something, wasn't it?
Chinese room test. That's right. Yes, that's it. His actual achievement, of course, was to invent effectively the digital computer. I mean, he worked out the theory of digital computing, and even actually worked on producing real computers. Of course, he was central. So now why is that relevant, Martin? What's Turing got to do with Chomsky?
Well, basically, Chomsky's view of language is computational. He says what Turing said, that language is just a set of computations. It's just a mathematical thing.
Yeah. So the idea is that we think digitally. That in the human brain is a digital computer, or maybe several digital computers. Chomsky's interested in one, the digital computer that runs language. And historically, the reason why that was so important was because before this cognitive revolution that Chomsky was so much part of, the idea was radically different. Basically, there was nothing special in the head which made it possible for a child to learn language. You had the model was behaviorism. The mind's a kind of blank slate. Humans will do anything that you train them to do as a result of rewards and punishments. Children learn language much the way that a rat works out how to find its way through a maze. If you give the rat enough sort of rewards for getting it right and electrocute it when it gets it wrong. B.F. Skinner's idea was that a child acquires language that way.
Whose idea was it?
B.F. Skinner was the follower in the States of Pavlov in the Soviet Union with his dogs.
Operant conditioning.
Yeah. That's right, operant conditioning. And behaviorism also had the idea, linked to that there's no such thing as mind. And that was a very powerful dogma that you can't scientifically study mind, you can study behaviour. So don't worry about the mind of the rat, just observe its behaviour. And they apply that to humans. You can't say anything about mind, it's a fuzzy concept, doesn't mean anything really. And what the effect of Turing's work was to say, well look, computers in a sense can think. And it was very difficult once you worked out the mental states of computers to deny that humans have mental states. And the whole science of computing has assumed that it was possible to be scientific about these mental states as opposed to bodily physical states. So it was as a result of that, the idea that the mind must... Turing himself said a good way to understand what human thinking is, how it works, is to make a computer. And if you know how computers work, that will at least help us to understand how humans think and produce language. So as Martin said, the computational theory of mind came out of that. And that's regarded as, by all the supporters of this cognitive revolution, as a massive breakthrough, because it kind of solved one of Descartes' fundamental problems. Descartes' problem was, if mind is utterly different from matter, which he said it was, so you have matter which you can weigh, which extends in space, and you can smell it, kick it, and all that stuff. Mind is it's the same thing as soul, and you can't weigh the soul. The soul isn't more or less there. You've either got a soul or you haven't got a soul. But how on earth can soul and body influence each other? How does the body connect up with the soul? Well, in a way, the computer revolution helped solve that, because you can think of it as software versus hardware. So information doesn't weigh anything, doesn't taste anything, and so on, but it can be encoded in material. So the hardware of the computer can run the software, but the software is a very different concept from the hardware. So that distinction helped this new focus on mind as something real, because information is real. Right, nearly finished. Anyone did I know who this is?
Which one?
He's late.
Yes.
You should update the slides.
Yes, I think he has died actually. Probably, I think so. Benoit Mandelbrot, the
mathematician,
Yes,
the fractal.
fractal geometry. Yes, okay, yeah. And Mandelbrot's discovery of fractal geometry was subtly, massively influential. So the idea is a very, very simple operation, iterated, in other words, repeated enough times, can produce marvelous levels of complexity. So the most complex mathematical object known is called the Mandelbrot set. Anyone seen the Mandelbrot set? Maybe I've got a picture of it. But it's the most complex mathematical object that we know of. And it's got an incredibly simple formula. So the simple formula, you just keep repeating it, and it produces this. And there's just no end to the beauty and symmetry and complexity of a Mandelbrot set. Well, if language is like that, it would be wonderful, because if language looks like it's massively complicated, especially with all the different languages, but maybe it's a very, very simple algorithm underlying it all. Maybe just a formula, simple mathematical formula. So and of course the Mandelbrot set is, in a sense, perfect. There's nothing, it hasn't got any flaws. There's no little smudges in it. It's just mathematical. And Chomsky's idea was that language is perfect and mathematical. And even though it seems to be complex, underneath it all is something really, really simple. This guy here.
Norbert Wiener.
No. Yeah, his name's Warren Weaver. He's Shannon and Weaver, the classic information theorists. So modern, in a way, telecommunications theory. But he was also a massively important scientific fixer. I don't say running the RAND Corporation, but he was central within the Rockefeller Foundation, the RAND Corporation. And he, just after the war, helped to secure massive military funding for machine translation in the place where Chomsky ended up working, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he had the idea there was like two ways of doing machine translation. One is the way which actually worked in the end, which is massive memory and probability theory and getting it better and better and better. Nowadays machine translation isn't that bad. You can get the text in German and translate it into English. You can find it on the web. It does a rough job, but then gradually improving it. But it doesn't work from the basis of logic. It's kind of trial and error to the massive memory probability. But Weaver said it'd be much better if underlying all the languages of the world was a simple universal grammar. Because then what you could do, if you were getting a machine to translate from Russian to English, you translate Russian into this underlying perfect language, and then back up again from this perfect language to English, French, or anything else. So you had this idea that it's just possible that you could do it that way. In the end, it didn't work, but that was the idea which Chomsky was sponsored to work on.
Actually, Chris, some of the modern translators do just that, but the perfect language they use is English.
Okay. Well,
They translate from Russian to English, from English to German.
they do that. I wonder how much gets lost in translation. Yeah, huge amount, obviously. Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
But it's interesting, that approach. You can see how that's that approach starts in the Cold War, but that's a 50-year displacement from one enormous intellectual development of the early 20th century, was that using logic as a basis to explain mathematics.
Yeah.
So they felt they'd already succeeded in one area, these people, and they were.
So why not? So why not? Having applied logic to mathematics, why not move on a step and do it and apply the same methods which have worked to language? That's exactly it. Yeah. And then I've stuck this guy in for reasons which will become clear. He happens to be the director of the CIA.
Still.
No, not now. Sorry, his name's John Deutsch, and he was the director of the CIA. I believe in the late 80s and early 90s, under Clinton. Okay, and the thing is, he was actually quite a close friend of Noam Chomsky's, because he worked in before he became director of the CIA. He was working as a chemist in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, designing fuel-air explosives. They're called daisy cutters. So things you drop them about half a mile up, and they're wonderful from the point of view of military, because everything's intact, all the buildings are intact, all the machines intact, but every person, every living thing is dead with the initial blast. When it came to an election in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to elect the provost, nearly all Chomsky's friends wouldn't have dreamt of voting for John Deutsch because they knew what he was up to. But Chomsky thought his view was, well, at least we know where we stand with him. He's honest, he's upright, I get on well with him. And he voted for him, and he didn't actually get the job, the provost. He ended up with a better job, director of the CIA. But it was Chomsky was quite adamant that he was the man for the job. And the reason why that's just relevant is just showing you the kind of world that the social world, the intellectual world that Chomsky was in. He said that he's perfectly honest about it. He said that no two human beings could have had more different political views, but still he was rubbing shoulders with these people who were developing these fuel-air explosives, working at command and control systems for delivering H-bombs and all that. That's what the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was fundamentally about. And that's why it's regarded as the Pentagon's main university. It was what it says, Institute of Technology. Although, of course, it did all kinds of other things. Yes, all right. So we're just going to go back over this. Now, this is just Descartes, and I just put it in there because it's just such a lovely quote. It kind of anticipates so much. I'll just read it out. And were someone to explain correctly what are the simple ideas, exactly what Robin said, what are the simple ideas in the human imagination out of which all human thoughts are composed, and if his explanation were generally accepted, I would then dare to hope for a universal language which was very easy to learn, speak and write. Most of all, such a language would assist our judgment by representing matter so clearly that it would be almost impossible to go wrong. As it is, almost all our words have confused meanings, and men's minds have become so accustomed to them that there is virtually nothing that they can understand perfectly. Now I hold that such a language is possible, and that the knowledge on which it depends can be discovered. But do not hope ever to see such a language in use, for that the world would have to become a terrestrial paradise. And this happens only in fiction. But it captures nicely his idea, I think, that quote. And it's not too different from the official goal that Chomsky was employed to work on. All right. Now this is building number 20 of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I've kind of called it Chomsky's Tower. It isn't at all high, you can see particularly, and he had a very shabby little office. And apparently the great thing that Chomsky and his colleagues had, the reason they loved this building was because it was temporary, and all the walls were like, you could just pull them down, you could remove a partition, build another one, you could drill a hole through a wall to put your wiring in for your equipment. But this was the in a way the nerve centre. I won't say the nerve centre of the US military, but in terms of science and development and all that stuff, it certainly was. And building number 20, it's all romantic, legendary status in all the biographies of Chomsky. It was the place from which Chomsky did his work. And this was the first, I think it's true to say, it's the first time a linguist, you know anything about a linguist, what does a linguist normally do? He goes to places and he finds out about languages. You go to Australia, you go to the Hopi, you go to the Navajo, you go to all these places and you learn the languages. and you try to work out how they differ and how they're similar. Chomsky did everything from this lab. He stayed in that lab, never moved out of it, and his work was, we'll see, was supposed to have military uses. Chomsky would deny that, and he's right, because it didn't directly have military uses. But the reason for the huge funding for the work that Chomsky was involved with was machine translation. The reason why machine translation was important was for systems of command and control. The idea was, ideally, that this is the dawn of the computer age, just beginning to build these massive computers, but the idea was that if you could have a mechanism, a digital computer, which contained inside it the underlying principles of all the world's languages, then hopefully you could talk in the vernacular, any language you like, speak to this machine, it would translate it into this perfect language and then back out again. And instead of getting your controllers, your military personnel, your officers, on the ground having to learn computer speak, they could just talk in their own language and the computer would understand and do the job. The missile, whatever it was, would move in the right direction because it would understand because it's got universal grammar inside it. Yes?
One small apocryphal story about Nerve Centre and Building 20. It's supposed that the mishearing of the term nerve centre as nerd centre. How have you got that word? Computer error.
Certainly a whole bunch of, I won't say nerds necessarily, but a whole bunch of boffins. So this is Colonel Edmund P. Gaines, one of Chomsky's colleagues, Fritz Neumayer, a wonderful historian of the period. He had the sense to actually ask one of the military folk who had been sponsoring this new kind of linguistics that Chomsky was involved with, why were you spending all this money on linguistics? And it's a good question because MIT wasn't known for linguistics. It hadn't done it. It had a little bit of linguistics, but it wasn't the centre of linguistics. And so anyway, Neumayer found this Colonel Edmund Gaines in the 70s, and this is what he said. The Air Force has an increasingly large investment in so-called command and control computer systems. Such systems contain information about the status of our forces and are used in planning and executing military operations. For example, defense of the continental United States against air and missile attack is possible in part because of the use of such computer systems, and of course such systems support our forces in Vietnam. The data in such systems is processed in response to questions and requests by commanders. Since the computer cannot understand English, the commander's queries must be translated into a language that the computer can deal with. Such languages resemble English very little, either in their form or in the ease with which they are learned and used. And this is the key line. Command and control systems would be easier to use, and it would be easier to train people to use them if this translation were not necessary. We sponsored linguistic research in order to learn how to build command and control systems that could understand English queries directly. So that was what the military thought they were getting out of Noam Chomsky. Okay. It's quite subtle and quite complicated. Chomsky says, I was never interested in machine translation. It's kind of true. He certainly wasn't pulling up his sleeves, with a screwdriver and circuit boards and actually trying to make the machine which would work. And certainly he wasn't interested in improving the statistical likelihood that machine translation would be correct. But on the other hand, his job was to look at the underlying theory of language, to see whether or not this special idea of getting machine translation by delving down to the deepest roots of all the world's languages, this universal grammar, he was prepared to do that because it was, in his view, it was pure science. He wasn't directly involved in any of its practical uses. Does everyone know, why that might have been a bit of a difficult thing for Chomsky? Chomsky is probably best known for being, and he is. He's undoubtedly America's most, and has been for half a century, most staunch, courageous, implacable, hostile critic of US military policy all his life. Never flinched from that. So you can see, can't you, what I'm trying to get at. Here we have the world's #1 opponent of the US military, the Pentagon, working in this lab, funded by them, their idea being they were getting something out of him that they could use. So if it would be me, I would feel comfortable about it. Chomsky, no doubt about it, he felt uncomfortable about it. He wasn't at all happy about the military implications. But on the other hand, we all have to earn a living, we all have to get a job from somewhere. You know, it's a difficult decision. You're doing pure science, these wretches are paying you. I'm not sure I would refuse money from people, full foundation, any of these people, you know, if they were prepared to fund research which I thought worthwhile. So I'm not making a cheap point. I'm trying not to make a cheap point here. But I'm simply saying it's paradoxical. Yeah. So now this is one of Chomsky's formulations of how he sees language. Thanks, Kim, needs a bit of focus here. And you can see what I'm saying here. You can see that corresponds pretty much to what Colonel Gaines was talking about. So before reading that, just think about language, human language. When we're talking, we're gesturing, we're making jokes, we're using metaphors. You have to read behind what's literally said to the underlying intention of the thing. I mean, it's wonderfully creative. It's really nothing like a rigid machine with some perfect digits giving exact instructions, is it? When I speak and you speak, that's not what's happening. But now we read this, we can think of the initial state of the faculty of language. By that, the initial state, he means the object in the head, the digital computer which is installed in everyone's head before the little child realises, oh, I must be in Japan. I think this language must be Japanese. Right, let's work out what, press all the right buttons to come out with Japanese. Before that happens, before you know where you are, you've got the language faculty in its initial state. So we can think of the initial state of the faculty of language as a fixed network connected to a switch box. The network is constituted of the principles of language, while the switches are the options to be determined by experience. When the switches are set one way, we have Swahili. When they're set another way, we have Japanese. Each possible human language is identified as a particular setting of the switches, the setting of parameters in technical terminology. If the research program succeeds, we should be able literally to deduce Swahili from one choice of settings, Japanese from another, and so on through the languages that humans can acquire. So you just press this button, this button, this button, and up comes English. So forget the fact that English is like the result of all the Angles and Saxons and Danes and all the history and the Norman conquest and all that stuff, all the complicated things which have made English a rather messy but very interesting language, like all languages actually. No, you can look at it a different way, according to Chomsky. You can have a box of switches, and so there's a fundamental network. You've got the switches up, down, on, off. You press a few of them, and up comes Swahili. And his argument is that the child does that. So that he says that no learning involved in language. So a child has this box in its head. Monkeys and apes don't have. Humans do have it. And the child doesn't have to learn, if supposing it lives in Japan, doesn't have to learn Japanese. It gets a few sounds from which it works out, right, must be Japan. Right, what's Japanese? And it runs down through its system and presses the correct switches, and up pops all the complex grammar and the lexicon of Japanese. But if it's in France, of course, it thinks, oh, it must be in France. When I say it thinks, its head thinks. It doesn't consciously do that. The machine does that. So that's the idea. Okay, next one. Now, what I want to do here is to... we're not quite ready for this. Let me just turn this off in a second. Right. I find that linguists, mostly if they're historical linguists, if they're interested in child language acquisition, if they're interested in the uses of language, sociology of language, anthropological linguistics, if they're interested in metaphor theory, actually most linguists feel absolutely exasperated with Chomsky. It's because it kind of doesn't work when you're dealing with actual languages. And you'll find there's no shortage of articles and books saying that Chomsky linguistics is nonsense. A book came out quite recently called The Language Myth, just saying the whole thing's mythology. It's complete and utter nonsense. And recently, especially the last 10 years, I think there's been a swelling of reviews of Chomsky's work which have just said this is completely off the wall stuff. It's just, nothing works. But I don't want to just say it's nonsense. Because my point is that it's so obviously complete nonsense that there's no point repeating that. So just to perhaps emphasise, Chomsky, when he says that the language is an innate module in the head, included in that isn't just all the systems of grammar that you can have. He actually says all the words you can ever have are installed genetically in the brain. So a philosopher, Hilary Putnam, a few years ago, said, who's a friend of Noam's, he said, "No, what are you saying exactly? Are you saying that, take the word bureaucrat? Well, we're going right back to the Stone Age, to human origins. The very first humans ever to speak, did they already have implanted in their brain the concept bureaucrat?" Yes, Mr. Chomsky. All right, what about carburettor? He was fishing around for something which is just so impossible that you couldn't possibly have people who haven't even invented the wheel yet, who don't know what a motor car is. How can they already have the concept of carburettor? Are you saying that's innate? Chomsky said, yeah, that's innate. So can you see, and Putnam just says, well, so this module, which is put in the head at the moment we became human, must have installed already in it, genetically determined, all the words, all the concepts that you could ever have in advance of ever needing them. So before you've invented the motor car, before you've invented bureaucracy, I don't know, all these things, you've already got all these concepts. What I'm saying is, when I say it's nonsense, it's so obviously complete nonsense, isn't it? That you just don't know what to do, really. So rather than say once more that it's nonsense, I want to know a completely different question. So the stuff I've been working on, and hopefully my book will find a publisher. Most of the left-wing press have refused to touch the thing because they say Chomsky is very nice to them and they don't want to upset him. But my book isn't about that. It's not about to say it's nonsense. I want to know why this particular nonsense emerged at the moment it did and why it came to prevail. Because it is true that Chomsky has been overwhelmingly the dominant figure in linguistics for the second half of the 20th century, and even today. Not only that, he's regarded as having invented the discipline of linguistics. The argument is that before Chomsky turned up, linguistics wasn't scientific. When Chomsky published syntactic structures and his other things, for the first time he had a real hardcore scientific linguistics, invented almost single-handedly by Noam Chomsky. So rather than just say, look, it's nonsense, I want to know how it is that it was pulled out of him, became apparently authoritative, and ended up dominating a huge amount of thinking in the West for more than half a century. Now, and it's not just linguistics, it dominated linguistics and associated disciplines such as psychology for a very long time, and even today is still, put it another way, if you're in a conference of linguists, even those who are exasperated with Noam Chomsky's theories, they will still measure their own position, I think it's true to say, by reference to Noam Chomsky. He's like the gold standard, and you can be close to the gold standard, or distant from the gold standard, but you can't ignore Chomsky. He's the central figure. So I want to know why, and that picture I have to start with, a picture of different figures. I want to treat the 20th century as, you've got all these figures, you've got all these theories, and I want to do almost like myth analysis. I want to decode the 20th century, rather as if you're a social anthropologist, you're doing some field work, you've come across a tribe, it's got this shaman coming out with amazing formulations, and instead of saying it's all nonsense, an anthropologist shouldn't do it, you shouldn't say it's nonsense. You should ask a completely different question. Why does this nonsense seem to make sense to this person, these people at this time? How did it get there? That's the question I'm asking. Sorry?
That's the Marxist question.
That's the Marxist question, exactly. Sorry, yeah. So, I'm just going to come to the CIA, but let me just sensitize you to the issue. I'm asking, how is it that when Chomsky was asked by an interviewer, Noam, what is the... He said, no, what happens when the two Noam Chomskys meet up and talk to each other? Supposing Noam Chomsky, the anti-militarist activists, were to meet Noam Chomsky, the world-renowned linguistic scientist, what would they say to each other? Chomsky's reply was, nothing. There's no connection. There's no connection between my science and my political activism. They're completely apart. It's almost as if the two Chomskys aren't on speaking terms. In fact, I think that's what he is saying. They're not on speaking terms. So why would somebody have one mind doing this stuff, in effect for the military, at the end of the day, and another mind doing the exact opposite, working against the military. Because, as I said, Chomsky was unusually courageous. I mean, most academics are, you know, there's no words to describe how much they would cringe to power and the state. I mean, there's just no limit to it, really. So, hats off to Noam Chomsky. He's never flinched. So, he'd be prepared to get arrested in the 67, 68, 69. He was leading these massive demonstrations encircling the Pentagon, facing troops, you know, getting himself arrested. He became a central figure involved in the draft burning campaign, for example. It ended up with a huge movement, of course, and almost mutinies. Well, there were mutinies among the American troops in Vietnam, of course, and the American High Command were getting more and more worried, and they realised that if this went on, they'd need to bring back the troops from Vietnam and use them on the US campuses and cities, because the things were getting very turbulent, and no one was in the middle of all that. So, can you see, the point I'm trying to make is, if you're working in a military-funded lab to enhance systems of weapons command and control, while at the same time you are, for moral reasons and political reasons, for your conscience, you're becoming a major figure opposed to that very same Pentagon that's funding your research. I want you to just see, what do you do? How do you solve that problem? How do you work for them and then work? I mean, some people have said Chomsky didn't care about that. I've been told by some of Chomsky's friends he didn't care at all. He's working for MIT, working on this project, and he was openly against the military, which he was. But it's quite wrong to say he didn't care. He's very well aware of the paradox. He said, for example, every morning when I get up, I need to know that I can look myself in the eyes in the mirror. He said that often. So let's get to the next slide. So this is an interviewer saying, the new CIA director is John Deutsch. He's a former MIT provost, Massachusetts Institute. Did you know him? Answer, this is Chomsky. We were actually friends and got along fine, although we disagreed on about as many things as two human beings can disagree about. I liked him. We got along very well together. He's very honest, very direct. You know where you stand with him. We talk to each other. When we had disagreements, they were open, sharp, clear. Honestly dealt with. I found it fine. I had no problem with him. I was one of the very few people in the faculty, I'm told, who was supporting his candidacy for the president of MIT. All I'm saying, can you see what would make somebody, he's not schizophrenic, not at all. What would make you, with a perfectly whole mind, need to divide your life and your mind and your brain into two? Well, this would. So you've got two constituencies, and I very much doubt whether Noam Chomsky, when he goes to his anarchist meetings in the evening, again, denouncing the CIA, which he does correctly, he accuses the CIA of having its hands dripping in blood. He'll refer, for example, to the massacre resulting from the CIA's engineered coup against Sukarno in Indonesia in 1965. Millions of peasants were killed, and the Pentagon were very proud and pleased with this. Chomsky points out that if the same standards applied today to the standards used against the Nazis after the war, the Nuremberg trials, Kissinger, Nixon, Johnson, all those people would be hanged for war crimes. Mm-hmm. Spot on. In my view, it's absolutely correct to say that. And he's chatting with one of these criminals, the person who's inventing fuel air explosives. Well, can you see, if you're going to your anarchist meeting, you're not going to want John Deutsch sitting next to you. By the way, comrades, here's the director of the CIA. Are you? Is that right? And also, when you're having lunch with the director of the CIA, or the future director of the CIA, are you going to want, hanging around over the conversation, a bunch of anarchists with you?
Sorry,
no.
first, was it CIA first or MIT first? Which one came first? His role at CIA or MIT? Which one?
MIT was first. No, it's absolutely right. I need to be correct about this. When Chomsky was friends with him in MIT, and he voted for him to be provost, he was not the director of the CIA. That happened quite a lot later. Okay. All I'm saying is everybody knew the trajectory he was on. Chomsky's friends were perfectly well, and partly everyone knew his work was fuel air explosives. He was a leading chemist. So,
So his work at the MIT was really for the CIA. He was one of the...
No, I wouldn't even say that. I wouldn't say it's for the CIA. It's just that when the whoever it is recruits to be someone from academia to become a head of the CIA, director of the CIA, they want somebody solid, somebody intelligent, somebody who understands the weaponry, the science behind it, and so on. I mean, great, and he got the job. All I'm saying is, it's like what's the expression? Between a rock and a hard place. I mean, it's like how can you see how you're going to have to develop one language to communicate with the boffins that you're in with, and you're going to have a completely different language to talk to your anarchist friends where you feel politically at home, and you can make the points about the crimes these people are involved with. But you're going to have to split the two languages, and they mustn't have anything to do with each other. So in a nutshell, I'm arguing, this is the decoding I'm trying to do, that if you have to split these two sides of yourself from each other so that they don't even talk to each other, that would help to explain like a cascade of further splits which characterize Chomsky's work, because his science has got nothing to do with politics, they don't talk to each other. But then in addition to that, his linguistics doesn't engage with body, mind, outside language, culture, society. His linguistics is completely boxed off. So, for example, Chomsky's, we looked at that thing about the switches and the parameters. Chomsky possibly best known for this doctrine called the autonomy of syntax. Okay, that's his sort of key buzzword phrase. So syntax means arrangement. We're talking about the arrangement of words to make sentences. You could say it's very simple. You get one after the other. One word follows another. You can't have. You need two people to say two words simultaneously, so you have to do them in order. Syntax is much more complicated than that. It's not like close and a clothesline, one after the other. If there is a clothesline, it's a massive, complicated loops, structure, which is what syntax is all about. So beneath apparent form is a conceptual underlying form, but that form is autonomous, which means it's independent. This is just a quote from one of Chomsky's former colleagues, George Lakoff. It's independent of the body, so this is this nothing to do with the body at all. Independent of the brain, because the language organ has got nothing to do with the rest of the brain, nothing to do with memory, for example. It's independent of use. Chomsky says it's quite conceivable to have, conceptually, to imagine a child having full knowledge of, say, English, perfect knowledge actually of English, without having once heard or spoken a word of English. So the knowledge is just categorically separated from the use of that knowledge. Language is cut off from communication. He says language isn't for communicating. It's just for computing in your head. So perhaps I'll read this out because people are sometimes a bit surprised at some of these things. He's talking now about how a cosmic ray shower, I'll come back to this perhaps later on to develop this theory more in detail, but his theory is, let's say a few more things. Language is independent of use, independent of memory, independent of reference. So words don't refer to things, according to Chomsky. He kind of knows that they do in his common sense mode. But he says the word-thing relationship is hard, and it's too hard to say anything about it. So one of his friends in an interview said, "All right, Noam, what about the word? Let's take the name Noam Chomsky. Does this refer to you?" It's funny to read the interview because Chomsky gets into absolute knots in saying that we don't know what it would mean for the word Noam Chomsky to refer to him, Noam Chomsky.
Right.
So he says that, yeah. It's far too hard to work out what to say about that, but essentially he says the reference relationship doesn't exist. There is no reference relationship. And following that, he says the mind might as well be in a vat. So you might have the brain kept nourished with chemicals and kept warm to keep it like alive in a big glass vat, but it's completely cut off from other people, from the body, from use, from the world, from politics, from everything else. He says that. It's also completely separate from any precursor. So most people would think that if you've got language, especially if you think, as I do, by the way, that language is kind of an instinct, that a child doesn't need to be bashed on the head to learn grammar. It takes to language as if it kind of knew the basics already. That's true. That's an absolute, we know that now. But if language is an instinct, if humans are kind of genetically equipped with language-ready brains ready to acquire language, you must assume it must have come from something. There must be some precursor in our primate relatives or ancestors of that language instinct. According to Chomsky, no. So he cuts off language as an instinct from any Darwinian precursor form, and he also cuts off language from culture. So language is cut off from I would say from everything. I can't think of anything that he allows language to be, at the end of the day, connected to. It's a self-sufficient, perfect object in the head, separate from absolutely everything else. What am I saying? Yeah. Therefore, it must have come from kind of nowhere, and he suggests a cosmic ray shower. And his theory is that maybe, but this is only when he's pressed, by the way. It's when me and my colleagues in EVOLANG, we've pressed him, come on now, come up with a theory, will you please? And he finally came up with this theory. It must have been some kind of bipedal ape wandering around in the past and sort of encountered a cosmic ray shower. And this shower of cosmic rays caused a mutation. And the mutation, in an instant, installed, this is his words, installed, so it's just like installing some little extra bit module in your computer, installed a language organ.
It's a miracle.
And this language organ was perfect, and it had already innately installed in it all the possible grammars and all the possible words of all the possible past, present and future languages. And of course immediately people would say, but no, if this one individual has got perfect language and no one else has got language, how does anyone else understand what they're talking about? Okay, thank you, Camilla, that's it. This is quite a good thing to explain the theory. We have, the transition from ape to man, and then, jing, suddenly this amazing thing happens.
Sorry, where's that image from? He didn't use this, by the way.
This is my way of illustrating that. So this is kind of a double helix DNA, kind of relating what seems to be a bit miraculous to the sun.
That's beautiful, Chris. Beautiful.
Thank you. To tell a fairy tale about it, it's almost as if there was some higher primate wandering around a long time ago and some random mutation took place, maybe after some strange cosmic ray shower, and it reorganized the brain, implanting a language organ in an otherwise primate brain. That's his actual words. So of course people say, well, if it's just one individual, and it's not just they've got language, a little bit of language, they've got full-on, absolutely perfect language, but nobody around has got any language at all, how did anyone understand this person?
How did they transfer it?
And then he says it doesn't matter, because language isn't for communication anyway. It's for computing. And he actually, as far as I can work out, he seems to think that animals don't compute. He seems to think that animals don't think, or that we weren't thinking here, we didn't have thought, and suddenly thought emerges, all in one instant. So anyway, when people said to him, but no, it's not going to work because, one person with language won't be able to communicate, no one will understand them. He says, well, actually, you can use language even if you are the only person in the universe with language. And in fact, would even have adaptive advantage. If one person suddenly got the language faculty, which is his theory, that person would have great advantages. The person could think, could articulate to itself its thoughts, could plan, could sharpen and develop thinking, as we do in inner speech, which has a big effect on our lives. Inner speech is most of speech. Almost all the use of language is to oneself, and it can be useful for all kinds of purposes, to figure out what you're going to do, to plan, to clarify your thoughts, whatever. So, if one organism just happens to gain a language capacity, just happens, it might have reproductive advantages, enormous ones, and if it happened to proliferate in a further generation, they would all have it. So he has this kind of two-stage theory. His theory is that suddenly, as a result of some mutation, one individual got the full language faculty, and because they were more clever, it enabled them to reproduce better, and therefore the gene that made them have language would, after a while, be shared by others, its descendants, of course. And then when a whole bunch of individuals had the same gene, he now has a much more interesting theory. I think much more interesting. He says they're probably a group of hunter-gatherers, which is actually, yeah, that's good. That's great. And he says there's one thing we know about hunter-gatherers, and it's that they've got lots of space and they tend to disperse. They tend to split up. So he says, okay, as they split up, they would all have had the language faculty, and each group would have tried to figure out some way to externalize it. That's his words. So you've got the language faculty. So far, we haven't figured out how to make it so that it becomes audible or visible. So people would have figured out how to do it, but the way they figured out in one group would have been different from the way they figured out in another group, and another. So his theory is that you have two stages. One is perfect language, universal grammar, all inside yourself, which God, kind of, not God, but cosmic ratio I gave you. And then later on, people invent. I think that's what figure out means. Figure out ways to invent audible sounds or visible gestures. So what you've got now is humans with their consciousness, their collaborative activity, all they do is create imperfection. Because for Chomsky, imperfection is all these differences. So the perfect language is the one where no one could say a word to each other. But imperfection starts when humans start messing around with culture and communication and local traditions and all that stuff. And then they produce this world where no one can understand each other because we all speak different languages. So it's like a kind of Tower of Babel story, isn't it? You've got universal perfect language, and then until humans mess things up, and you get local variations.
Like Tower of Babel is also like a Platonic myth. You've got the original source of knowledge, which is the ideas, the cosmic ratio.
That's right.
And
Yes.
then you've got a reflection of this.
There's a wonderful book here which I haven't made anywhere near enough use of. Umberto Eco, wonderful philosopher, The Search for the Perfect Language, and it's a wonderful documentation of the religious mystics and prophets. A great long line of people. Descartes, we'd had that, was one of them, trying to figure out this perfect language. So, okay, here's another statement from Chomsky. And again, because in biology, nothing's perfect, by the way. If it's biology, it's not perfect. Your eyes aren't perfect. Your digestive system isn't perfect. Your spine isn't. There's all kinds of trade-offs. The idea of anything in biology being perfect is nonsense. And Chomsky kind of knows that. He says, language is perfect, which makes it very strange. Completely different from everything else we know in biology, which is a result of compromises and trade-offs between different costs and benefits. But he says, how perfect... This is, to get this into context, he said that the cosmic ray shower installs this amazing organ, digital organ, by the way. Digital is quite important because he knows that everything else in your brain is not digital. There's nothing digital about the way human brains work. It's messy, analog, if you like, massive, complex gradation, infinite gradations of awareness and so on. So the idea that anything's digital is very strange, although, of course, language is, no doubt about it, it is digital. It's digital on two levels. You've got the phonology, which is digital, and you've got the semantics, which is digital. So you can just change one distinctive feature in a sentence, remove the voicing from the first consonant, and you've got, a pin instead of bin. There's a massive difference. And it's digital, but his point is that if this mechanism, which is installed in the brain by the cosmic ratio, is digital, how does it get on with the rest of the brain? That's what he means by interfaces. What are the interfaces? So how perfectly does language satisfy the general conditions posed at the interface? If a divine architect were faced with the problem of designing something to satisfy these conditions, would actual human language be one of the candidates or close to it? Recent work suggests that language is surprisingly perfect. He's slightly qualifying his statement, but you can see the take-home message here. Language is perfect. It meets the conditions it's got to meet of a digital mechanism interfacing with all kinds of messy stuff. It meets those requirements to perfection. And this wonderful book here is about the Tower of Babel in so many different variants. And of course, in all those variants, you've got humans kind of messing things up. All right, I shouldn't quite say that. Actually. In the biblical version, it certainly does. So we'll just let's just go through this. Right. So this is the story, isn't it? And the whole earth was a one language and a one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, "Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and slime they had for mortar. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." These people seem to be revolutionaries. And let's make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. They're internationalists, they want to keep together. And the Lord came down. He seems to be a patriarchal killjoy, really. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there, I think that means Babel.
Yeah.
Because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth.
So God is an anti-internationalist reaction.
Oh, you
didn't say that.
You did suspect.
We could say that.
There's evidence.
There is some evidence for that statement, yes, certainly, yeah. Okay, now, before we get to the next one, okay, so now, what I'm just trying to say this is, there seems to be, among all these patriarchs, going right back, a real worry about a universal language which was a real language which people really did use to collaborate. And the whole issue of whether or not we can investigate the process of the emergence of language has always been, I think for that reason, very fraught. There's all kinds of religious and worries and taboos and philosophical taboos about going down that road and finding out anything about it. Now I put Chomsky in that same tradition. In other words, he is one of those philosophers, and by the way, I think he's more of a philosopher than a scientist. Philosophers kind of stay in their room or their laboratory, and they kind of come out with thoughts from time to time, and everyone's amazed at the new thought. They don't go and do the experiments, and they don't go and find things out. I think he's, no doubt at all, Chomsky's major role has been as a philosopher. But one of those who's very anxious, Anthony, you were saying this, weren't you? Very anxious to preserve the idea of the divine spark in humans, which isn't all bad. I've got the same idea. I think humans are radically different from apes, and it's a perfectly, not just valid idea, but I think a very important idea. But the way in which the patriarchs do it is different. They want to completely cut off this amazingly creative mind from the idea that we were once apes, or that this mind can be contaminated with all the messy stuff that would destroy its perfection. So, I'm sure most of you know this. Next slide. This is the statutes. This is everybody involved in this field that I've been involved with, and Martin has as well. EVOLANG, looking at the origins of language. It's quite an exciting new field.
Rigorously banned.
Do you want to translate that, Robin?
The Society of Linguistics for the Study of Languages. Legends, traditions, those documents, costumes documents pertaining to the explanation of economic science.
Any other object?
Other object of study is rigorously prohibited.
And then Article 2. La société n'admet aucune communication concernant soit l'origine du langage, soit la création d'une langue universelle. So anything about either a universal language or how language originated is prohibited.
Yeah.
Now, the Linguistic Society of Paris was so prestigious in 1866, when it was first set up, that ban, amazingly, held. It was a taboo which spread and spread and spread, and it lasted until something in the 1970s, really. Nobody after that, and the British Philological Society passed a very similar resolution, I think a year or two later.
So they ban language, the art, study of the origin.
No one's allowed to study the origins of language.
Why?
Very good question. Very good question. Now, the people, according to Rebecca Cann, who's a brilliant geneticist, one of the discoverers of African Eve, she says that these people were Catholic monarchists in France running this society, and they were just deeply reactionary, and they were very worried about Darwin, in particular, and anything to do with Darwin, and especially because Paul Broca, a Frenchman, of course, had worked out, Broca's area, somebody else worked out Wernicke's area. People were beginning to locate different language functions in parts of the brain, and they wanted to just cut all that off and treat language as utterly uncontaminated by this messy Darwinian biological stuff. Martin, yes?
To be fair, they also received a lot of papers around this time.
Thank you.
Because of Darwin and because of Broca, which were mad.
That is.
What were the papers about?
Well, they were just mad. They were proving that Adam was the first human being, or they were proving that language was 50 million years old.
That's exactly. Need to say that. And of course, Chomsky says that about us. Chomsky says. He says we've got all these fairy stories, all these EVOLANG people coming up with armchair speculations. It's all a complete waste of time. Forget it. You'll never know what the origin of language is. But he said, if you want fairy stories, I'll give you another one. And he gives us the cosmic ratio. Yeah, just probably.
The other thing is about if these people were Catholic reactionaries, then the traditional clerical explanation of the origin of language was to say that Hebrew, the language of Adam, was the first language. And so early experiments in linguistic analysis were to try to derive all modern languages from Hebrew, which can't be done. So they're not even within the same language family. Right? So,
and it's a bit like the later idea that the perfect language is Latin.
Yeah.
Or then the perfect language was Sanskrit,
And now it's English.
And now probably it's English.
I read a paper by an Arabic scholar, I say scholar in inverted commas, who's proved that Arabic is the first language. It's still going on today.
Yeah.
So, do you want to stop for tea break now and carry on this?
You're allowed to carry on.
Well,
Mark isn't here.
Oh, Mark's not here.
Carry on.
I think we've just got a few more slides, really, mostly on the Russian Revolution and its exciting
Have
ideas.
a break. Get a beer and come back.
Yeah. So this is Klebnikov. So Klebnikov's most famous poem was called Incantation by Laughter. He wrote it in 1908. I think it was published in 1910. And this is an English translation. What the translator has done here, very clever, has gone back to the English word laugh. I think it was chlachflen or something like that. And chlachflen was like sounds like laughter. So that's what Klebnikov did to the Russian word meaning laughter. All these permutations, combinations, and variations. And the idea was that, and it's true, Russians find it very hard to read that without laughing. It's just funny, and it's kind of like cast a spell. And it gives some idea of the playfulness, the childlike creativity and playfulness of Klebnikov, Malevich, I mean, all those artists that we still look back on. And Picasso, of course, was one, not Russian, but hugely influential, part of the same basic movement, where suddenly it was the creativity of the mind which was being celebrated. And of course it was linked to the idea that now, very shortly, we're all going to be free from oppression, Tsarism, the state, and we're going to put the whole world together. So we'll just go quickly through these. Yes, come on, next one, please.
Read in Russian now.
Well, I can read that in Russian, but I better not take too long.
Oh, go on.
You want me to? I'll put it back.
Go on, yes.
O rozśmiejcie śmiechaci, o zasmiejcie śmiechaci, что смеются смехами, что смеютствуем смеяльно. O zasmiejcie usmiejalno, o rozmieścisz nasmiejanych, śmiech usmiejanych śmiechaci. O śmiejся rozsmiejalno, śmiech nadsmiejanych śmiechaci. Смеево, усмех, осмех, смешики, смешики. Смеюнчики, о, рассмейте смехачи, о, засмейте смехачи.
You made that
So-
up, Chris.
So, great.
He had those in his head thanks to a video that Cosmic Ray Shower.
Something like that, exactly. Yes. But this was a burst of humour, playfulness, creativity. Malevich, the woodcutter. We all went, didn't we, in Raglan in the summer to the Tate for the Malevich exhibition. So you can see the sort of, again, the same idea. You're breaking, instead of looking at figures, shapes, bodies, you're thinking, what are the geometrical components, the mathematical components underlying like a woodcutter? So cubism is that idea. You go back to instead of just looking at the surface of it, you almost like you want to build that body out of the simplest shapes you can imagine. So that's yes, and I think the next one. That's probably the most iconic painting
level.
of all. This is not quite level.
It's square.
This is
Very detailed.
yeah. There you are. That's it. This is the most famous painting.
Is that a Rothko or something?
It's actually Malevich. It's black on black, black square.
It's exactly
It was at the Tate Modern in the summer. It's like that. Let's get rid of all the anything superfluous, all the fiddly bits, all the mess,
It's modernism.
and just get to the rock bottom basics. And it's also like let's destroy everything and find that maybe there's still something there when we have destroyed everything.
Maybe.
Is there?
Maybe. You don't know.
And of course, Mayakovsky was Klebekov's colleague and close friend. In many ways, put into popular form the techniques that Klebnikov was inventing, and it's like they regard themselves as almost like mechanics of the soul. They believe in the soul.
Engineers
Engineers of the soul. That's exactly it. Art is not a mirror to reflect the world, but a hammer with which to shape it. There's a few disputes about who exactly came up with that. Some people think it was Brecht. I think it was Mayakovsky. But anyway, it's certainly the same idea. That art isn't just about things on walls that we go and look at. It's about getting out there and making the streets wonderful and
So
exciting.
what's this to do with language and Chomsky? I'm just trying
Right, okay, I know it's a really good question. I'm finding it difficult to answer that question, but I'm going to because the argument is that this stuff from the Russian Revolution was really the source of Chomsky's work at its best, because one side of Chomsky's work is wonderful, to be honest. I mean, rather, one side of the cognitive revolution was great, because it's celebrating creativity, celebrating the mind, treating humans as having, a nature which is complex. We're not just passive. We don't just passively reflect stuff that's given at us. We have our own agendas right from being little kids. The cognitive revolution is all about studying cognition, and that hadn't really been done before. So, and the futurists were practicing those ideas about cognition being active, about going out in the world, and the way a little child does. It doesn't just soak up information, it explores with its fingers, its tongue, its eyes. They're actively making sense of the world while kind of changing it.
Tried to build the
So that part of the cognitive revolution, which by the way was represented much more by Jerome Bruner than by Noam Chomsky. Chomsky was much more the sort of computer geek side of it. Jerome Bruner was much more the playful, creativity, cultural side of that revolution. But that side of it, I don't think it started in America in the 50s. I think it started back during the Russian Revolution and its effects around Europe, because the Russian Revolution was an extreme form of a great intellectual ferment that was elsewhere. So Einstein, you could say, was part of it, but Picasso was part of it. In science and the arts, a huge period of creativity, which was then stomped on by what the disasters of the interwar period with Stalin and Hitler and all that stuff. So this is one of Trotsky's barges. It was doing the agitprop. The Russian Revolution initially was, not at all what we think of it under Stalin, socialist realism. They painted these incredible colours. This is all. What's the word? Beatles-style colours, psychedelic is the word. Psychedelic colours, brilliant reds and blues and purples and yellows on their barges and railway trains, spreading the ideas of the revolution across. And above all, we have Chaplin's Tower. So This tower was going to be, I think, 3 times higher than the Eiffel Tower, and it was completely. It's an example of lunacy at its best, I suppose. Everything's cyclical, everything's moving, and this was going to be connecting heaven and earth. It's like the revolutionists wanted to get to paradise, like not after all dead, not long in the future, but let's do it right now. Let's get there. And this thing was going to be teeming with workers, peasants, intellectuals from all over the world, all working out how to spread this revolution. The bottom part spinning around once a year, this part spinning around once a month, this part spinning around once a day. On the top had all kind of radio aerials. This is also called, and this is obviously a Photoshop. It's roughly what it would have looked like in real life. A huge, massive building. Really, like, you couldn't see it. You can see it's designed to be spiraling out of the earth, going into the clouds. It was at 23 degrees, aimed at the pole star, aimed at the darkest point of the sky. Another picture.
Is that supposed to be?
And of course, the inspiration for this was Khlebnikov.
Yes.
So it's Khlebnikov's idea of a universal language built into a tower, reversing the curse of Babel. Like God may say, we're not supposed to get to heaven, but we're saying, why don't we give it a good old try? With this amazing structure. Can we get through the next one? We can get through quickly. And these ones, these are just more of these amazing things. Okay, another one. So this is, and this is Khlebnikov. His idea was to find the roots of, first of all, the different Slavic tongues, but then if you go deep enough, you find the roots of all the world's tongues. Come on, the next one. This is Roman Jakobson, My Futurist Years. He was a futurist. This is his distinctive features theory. These are all the digital switches in the mouth, which are part of our nature, which enable us to switch between distinctive features, therefore switching between vowels and consonants, therefore switching between the meanings of words. Let's go quickly through all this. This is just showing that the basic phonological system is A, natural, and B, digital. It's natural, we were equipped with this stuff, and then it's like a digital machine that we're all equipped with, from which language, or spoken language, is produced.
So this is where Chomsky is coming from?
I'm saying that, yes. I'm saying the best example he had of a real object in all of us, innate, which is digital, is the speech apparatus, as interpreted by Jakobson, thanks to Khlebnikov and the futurists. So this then gets into Levi-Strauss, with one bit only. This is poor old Khlebnikov working out hugely complicated mathematical formula to capture the rhythms of history.
And the revolution.
He predicted, by the way, he did get it right in 1912 with his big table. This is called the Tables of Destiny. In 1912, he worked out, right, there should be the revolution should happen in 1917. So, of course, when it did, yay, got it,
So then what was he called?
He was called King of Time. He was called the King of Time. This is Chomsky. This is one of his paintings of the logical structure of linguistic theory. It's all kind of mathematics. It makes no sense. This makes no sense. Chomsky would admit that it makes no sense. No one's ever seen those formulae before. Again, after he wrote this book, Logical Structure, but still, because it was so complex.
Levi-Strauss mathematics.
And then, of course, we have Levi-Strauss. So, next one, please. Now, this is what I meant by E equals MC squared. The idea was, this is, according to Levi-Strauss, this is the formula for world mythology. It's a mathematical formula. And can you see, it's like trying to be Einstein. E equals MC squared. Myths, okay, we can reduce it all to a formula.
It's physics envy.
Physics envy, that's right. And Levi-Strauss, just like Chomsky, whatever may have been the moment and the soap of the spirit of the day, and all that, language can only resolve all at once. Things cannot have begun to single way. So, okay, we move through that, we don't need that. This is the
Warren
okay.
Weaver.
No, Warren Weaver. No, this is worth
Are you
it.
going to make it?
I've got 1 minute.
Go 1 minute.
Right. This is Warren Weaver. This is, remember, Shannon Weaver. He's the great fixer. He set things up in a way, for Chomsky at MIT. And this is his, in a way, exciting idea. It is very exciting if it's true. It just happened to be wrong, but it was a lovely idea. And this is his favourite approach to the machine translation. Think by analogy of individuals living in a series of tall, closed towers, all erected over a common foundation. When they try to communicate with one another, they shout back and forth, each from his own closed tower. But when an individual goes down, this is to the depths of language, down, he finds himself in a great open basement common to all the towers. Here he establishes easy and useful communication with the persons who have also descended from their towers. Whilst it may be true that the way to translate from Chinese to Arabic or from Russian to Portuguese is not to attempt the direct route shouting from tower to tower, perhaps the way is to descend from each language down to the common base of human communication, the real but as yet undiscovered universal language, and then we emerge by whatever particular route is convenient. Now, this guy, he had money, he had a huge amount of influence. He could get the military to fund this amazing idea. And this is just the idea that this is the Mandelbrot. This is the Mandelbrot set. It's just the idea that deep down, beneath all the complexity of language or anything else, you've got the Mandelbrot set. No limit to how much you can explore the Mandelbrot set. But all the time. Okay, we can cut that. Okay, that's the end of that's the end.
But with that aim that Weaver pronounced, you can see there is the melding of a very ancient idea of a common original language with modern ideas of technology.
That's the point. So, I mean, if Weaver hadn't been Weaver, you'd have just thought he's some kind of mystic or crank.
No.
But he was the guy in charge of a huge part of the funding for the US military science projects. And so he took it really seriously. And it was because he was able to provide large amounts of money for this vision of machine translation, exactly the thing which Chomsky wanted to do. Because if you're looking for this deep universal language beneath all other languages, you're not doing dirty work for the Pentagon, you're doing proper science. Who cares who's funding you? I can sympathise with Chomsky there. Who cares where the money's coming from? You're just doing proper science.